Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jordan from Folia Health. And just for a little bit of background, we're a health tracking app that's all about making treatment and care focused on you as patients and what's important for you. So, our goal at Folia is to provide you with a simple way to track your symptoms, your treatments, and your flares so that you can gain insights about your health and ultimately have less bad days. So with Folia, you can track things like how your menstrual cycle affects your flare-ups, if your treatments are causing side effects and what those are, or how effective your treatment is at reducing fatigue, pain, and other symptoms you might be feeling. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I did want to share a disclaimer that we're recording this workshop today so that anyone who can't join us live will still be able to watch it. There will be opportunities to share, and if you would like to ensure that your share is cut out of the recording, please just let us know before you speak so that we can make sure to protect your privacy. I also wanted to thank everyone for submitting your questions ahead of time. They were all so great. And please do feel free to use the Q&A tool to submit any additional questions as we have our talk today. And then if you're not able to figure that out, you can also put it in the chat as well. That way we can just make sure to address those as we have them. And then for some of those more medically focused questions that we received, we're not going to be able to address those today, but we are working to schedule another Q&A session with a medical professional so that we can address them. So just know that we have them, we hear you, we're working on bringing you something soon, so just stay tuned for that, and we'll keep you posted. And that brings us to our topic today. Why do why do our autoimmune symptoms flare up around our menstrual cycles? And so I'm thrilled to introduce you to Marisa Zeppieri, our guest today. She's an author of an award-winning memoir, Chronically Fabulous, a talented artist, and founder of Lupus Chick, which is a support community for those with chronic illnesses and autoimmune disease. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Marisa.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm really excited to do this. I think it's such a crucial topic and one that I find, at least probably not until the last few years, is really talked about. And if you've read any part of my story or you're in my community, if you read my piece on Folia Health, I remember just growing up, and if you don't know my story, I started having lupus symptoms at the age of 8, and they were so clear. They were like literally textbook criteria for lupus, and doctors missed it for 15 years. And I think it was because they didn't happen all at once. They were very sporadic. So when I started to get my period at first, I did not know that I had lupus, and I just thought that I was having horrible, just premenstrual syndrome basically before my period. And then when I was diagnosed with lupus, even then, it was many, many years until I really started looking at my own data, and which is one of the reasons why I so strongly suggest that anyone that is living with a chronic illness start tracking their data. I did it years and years ago, old school, before we had like cell phones like this and technology, because I'm in my late 40s and that stuff did not exist 24 years ago when I was diagnosed. But, I would just write down every single day on like a cheap dollar store notebook of all of my symptoms, things that changed, even down to like the food I ate. Was I out in the sun? Because that was such a big deal with lupus. And for me, it's one of my biggest triggers. And I remember in the upper right-hand corner, I would put a little period and I would, put like 1, 2, or 3 or what day I was on. And it wasn't until after about 6 to 12 months of material that I was going back through some of my notes, and I would see that like those 3 days before that little period would show up in my notebook, my symptoms were like out of control. And also, I actually felt a lot better in like the week before. So this made absolutely no sense to me. But over time, I knew without a doubt that this was something that was happening every single month. And I had the proof, it was right in front of me. But at that point, I mean, it had been many years, and I had seen so many doctors that it sort of just blew my mind that no one, even the gynecologist, like no one ever said that this is an actual thing, right? Now, I don't know. A lot of my doctors, I will say, they were male. Maybe it's just like out of their wheelhouse, or I have no idea why they didn't talk about it. But I still think that it's not something that's really talked about a lot. But in the realm of autoimmune disease that are already so, just what's the word? They change so much based on the hormones that are going on in our body that we have to really be aware of these hormonal fluctuations. And if you're not already tracking, I would say absolutely that should be the first thing on your list because I would get regular like symptoms that a lot of women get like right before their period, and I would feel bloated and I would just feel tired, and I would have, some cramping, and I just didn't feel great. But I noticed that as the lupus just definitely got worse, and that's what eventually brought me to an actual diagnosis. Um, those 3 days before were very significantly different than just premenstrual, like normal, sort of symptoms that a lot of women get. And what I mean by that is I would get fevers, not like, just maybe a low grade normal lupus fever. Like I would get pretty intense fevers and I would start getting a lupus rash. So for me, my autoimmune was lupus, and that's how it came out whenever I was about to go into a flare. So it's like, it was almost like I was flaring like once a month. And I would get these really bad nose and mouth sores. That was one of like the worst things. And like clockwork, it was like 3, 4 days before they would come out. And there was a fatigue that is still so hard for me to even comprehend that I went through a fatigue where I would get up in the morning after sleeping like 9 or 10 hours. I would take a shower and I would be so exhausted that I would sit on my bathroom floor, and to the point where my husband and I actually put a pillow and a blanket in my bathroom because sometimes I would fall asleep there. I would be completely exhausted. I wouldn't even be able to get myself dressed and back to bed. So, lupus you already deal with so much fatigue, but with these hormonal fluctuations, I felt like it just amplified it so much. And so I would have these very specific lupus things. And also for me, I noticed that my heart rate would get really strange, which my heart is an area that lupus tends to sort of go for. So when I had all of this data after a while, I finally started to bring it up to my doctors. And I think my original doctor in Florida, who was primary, he was a DO. He definitely kind of dabbled in like functional medicine, so he was definitely more open-minded, and he was like, absolutely it could be like a hormonal thing. And that's when I really started to go and like do my research, and I found that this is a real thing, right? Because we have all of these phases of our menstrual cycle, which you can look up and research and go down a rabbit hole, which you probably will. Um, but we have these different hormones, right? We have estrogen, we have progesterone, and they both have like different effects. Like estrogen can have anti-inflammatory effects, and progesterone can have immunosuppressant effects or whatnot. So when they peak or they decrease, you can really start to see those couple of days beforehand. And what I found, like through Lupus Chick, with talking to other people that had autoimmune disease, not necessarily lupus, like I have a good friend of mine that is diabetic, they found that in those couple of days before that their blood sugars were quite different than they had been the rest of the month, and they would typically have to change their medication and the amount of the medication. And if you dig into that, you'll find that some of those hormones can cause like an insulin resistance or make it worse. So it all makes sense. But the crazy thing is, it's not something that is spoken about typically when you're diagnosed and when you're seeing physicians. At least that's what I have found. Um, and I'm grateful to like social media and our community because it was only through hearing a lot of other people that that's when I finally realized, okay, I'm not alone in this. pretty much every woman that I've spoken to that is getting their period has dealt with this. And I just want to give you a flip side because now, like, I wound up going into early menopause. And I remember when I was first diagnosed with lupus, I met a woman who was in her 70s at the time. And she said, "Oh, honey, that's so hormonal. When you go into menopause, it'll be the best time of your life." And it always stuck with me because I was so, so sick when I met this woman. And now that my hormones do not have these crazy fluctuations, I will tell you that a lot of my lupus symptoms have gotten a lot better. So it's just kind of amazing how much just those little fluctuations can really sort of wreak havoc in our body. Um, so I just want to be specific, like especially with those first 3 or 4 days right before you get your period, your progesterone does go up before that, and that could be a time because it has these immunosuppressive effects. You might actually feel like good, you know. And I remember like maybe the week before my period, I'd be running around, I'd be getting like stuff done. I felt like super accomplished. I'd have a couple of really good days, and I'd have this energy, and then it just dips. And when it dips, your that immunosuppressive action is now sort of gone and your immune system can sort of like flare back up again. And that's when the symptoms would happen. And that's a normal part of the menstrual cycle. So I'd say if you're sort of wondering, okay, am I just having like normal premenstrual, symptoms? Then really like look if you don't already track your data. Sorry, I'm having some brain fog today. If you don't already track your data, like think about it. Like, yes, you might get bloated, you might feel a little irritable, you might feel fatigue, but if you're noticing very classic symptoms for whatever autoimmune disease you deal with, like your sugars are off, or you're breaking out in a rash, you're having extreme joint pain, maybe your joints are getting really swollen, almost like they would if you were just outside of your period going into a flare up. Maybe if you have psoriasis or something skin related, you're noticing like more breakouts. So, something that's very specific that isn't normally like categorized in what like normal menstrual cycle symptoms are. And you can look those up online. And I mean, again, a lot of them are like just the bloating and, some pain and fatigue and that irritability. Um, Mine were so different on top of already feeling all of those things. I had this other set of symptoms. So that's when I finally started to really, bring it up to my doctors. And I had like years at that point because this went on. But I tracked for years. I really wanted to figure out all of the things that were affecting me. And I learned, like, in that data that my menstrual cycle was definitely a trigger as far as my lupus symptoms, as well as the sun and the heat. And so I was living in Fort Lauderdale at the time. And so when those three things would all come in together, I mean, I would literally be a mess and I would be in bed for a good 7 to 10 days out of every month just for that. Not if I was also flaring up at other times in the month. So if you're noticing separate symptoms, I would definitely talk to your doctor and see if there is something, everyone's different. I I will use medication for certain things, and medication has saved my life at times. When I also tend to go towards alternative and complementary therapies, just because I hate taking medication. I've been taking it since I was a little girl for different issues, and I try to keep it as little as possible, unless, I'm like in the emergency room and they're giving me a ton of stuff. But some things that I do want to share that have helped me is, and these are things that you hear about a lot online, but I think you just have to sort of play around like trial and error and see what works for you. But food and diet has been a huge thing. Like there are absolutely foods that we eat that cause inflammation in the body. And for people that are healthy, their body can they can handle that inflammation and they can process it and sort of get through it without it affecting them. But if you're eating inflammatory foods every single day, like it's just throwing more and more on, and your body is just trying to process through what it's already dealing with and then with that. And that's stuff like really fried food, fast food, like just processed food. I just try to stay out of the supermarket, the interior, and I try to stay along the outside where things are usually more fresh. Um, and then like functional medicine, my functional medicine doctor has been a godsend for me. So yes, I have my pharmaceutical medication that I take, but through my functional medicine doctor, I've been able to try a lot of different supplementation and introduce herbs that have really helped, things that are very anti-inflammatory, and they're typically very high, like pharmaceutical grade anti-inflammatory. So it's not just going to the supermarket and buying, some turmeric powder and putting it on your food. It's just like jam-packed as far as the amount that you're getting per serving in some of these functional medicine supplements. So through that, I have been able to decrease symptoms, but also doctors had me on like 12 medications at one point, and now I've been on, give or take, around four for many, many years. So functional medicine has been a huge part of my life. And then if you feel like right before or during your period, um, because I do want to add, I'm sorry, I should have added this earlier. As soon as my period would start and those hormones once again kind of shift, I didn't feel as horrible as I did those last 4 days. And now I still had to deal with the symptoms that broke out because if any of you have lupus and you get the sores and you get the rash, those things don't magically disappear, like the sores and things for me would take a good week or so. But it would be like this super low, and then the period would start, and then I would start to sort of level out again. And this is what happened every single month. Um, so when I would get really bad cramping and body pain, I notice a lot of more muscle and joint pain. I know a lot of people use heating pads. I'm a big fan of like infrared heating pads. I talk about those a lot too on Lupus Chick, and they don't get as warm. You might be wondering, like, is this thing even working? I have found them to be incredible, and the difference is they can really get in actually a couple of inches um, through the skin with the infrared, and they can actually help sort of like with the circulation and actually like healing if there is any inflammation and swelling. So I would say maybe check something like that out. And for me, it was like really this journey of years. I talk about a lot in my book of just, okay, I'm just going to try everything because there was a point there where I don't think doctors even knew what to do with me. It was just like, well, this is the best we can do with all this medicine. And I just felt like I was being sent home from the hospital of like, hey, I hope you make it, and I really felt like I was on my own. So I was like, well, let me just try everything that's available to me and like see if it works because what do I have to lose at this point? Um, so I tried things like acupuncture and massage, which has really been helpful. And I think it's just knowing if you are suffering even more so on those few days, there's a lot of lifestyle changes that you're going to have to just start implementing. And I know that that can be easier said than done because, a lot of us work or we have family obligations and it's hard because you're trying to take care of yourself while dealing with responsibilities and other people. But I sort of had to shut down those 3 or 4 days. Like I knew very bad idea, Marissa, if you plan doctor's appointments or treatments on those days, because it was highly unlikely that I was even going to be able to get in the shower and dressed and get myself to that appointment. Those were great work at home option days if I was working at that time in my life. And I would try to like ramp up. I'm a big juicer, so I would try to like ramp up on juicing and have some like ready and set for me. Even maybe set your meals up and like get things so that you can do the bare minimum, hopefully, and try to rest if possible. I know that this isn't always possible. But even if you could do some of those things and prepare for sort of those days that like this is the time that's really hard for you. And the other thing is I know that, some doctors maybe we hear the term gaslighting and a lot in the chronic illness community, and it is absolutely a real thing. I love data, and I think doctors are really data driven. So I tell people to be like really specific when they are in a doctor's office and advocating for themselves. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. I can go in and tell a doctor, I just feel really tired and, my body hurts and I had like some fevers. Or I can go in there, which I've done, like with my journal, with my phone now, with photos. Okay, I had 101 or higher fever, 3 out of the last 10 days. I've been sleeping an average of 12 hours a night. This is when my fingers were swollen. Here's some photos. I had rashes that lasted for this long, like very specific things. Or I was unable to do the term activities of daily living, which is just like normal activities that a healthy person can do. I was not able to do that, 10 out of the last 30 days. Also, I've been tracking my symptoms, and these 3 days before my period every single month for the last, whatever, 18 months, these are the symptoms that come out. So I think when they see data like that, it's very hard, or it's at least harder for them to sort of brush you off as like, well, it could happen. You might be imagining it, or whatever it is that happens. I've had doctors be um, on the same like team as me and like, yeah, let's look into this, and other doctors of, it just sounds like it might be regular menstrual, and it was definitely not. Um, so going back to whatever you can do, maybe one month you just try, okay, I'm going to try to lighten my load, for those couple of days. And maybe the next month you want to actually prepare some food for yourself, or try to maybe bring in a functional medicine doctor. Like I tell people, like this has been a 20 plus something year journey for me. So I've been able to add these things over time, and it can seem really overwhelming. Don't try to do all of this stuff at first and then you feel like you're failing. And that was the other point that I wanted to make is I'm really hard, like I'm really hard on myself. I give other people a lot of grace, but I don't, I've had to learn to give myself that own grace over the years. And my mom always tells me, she's like, you're always so hard on yourself. You're so hard on your stuff. And, like just be gentle with yourself. And so I would get really frustrated in those like 3 or 4 days before, and at my body. Like I would get so frustrated at my body because I would be comparing myself to my friends that had no autoimmune or chronic illness at all and would have their period and would be like outside running and going to the gym and working. And, yeah, they didn't feel like great or they had cramps, and I was like completely debilitated in bed and I felt like literally I was going to die. I'm just going to be honest. So I would put a lot of pressure on myself. And at that time, I didn't have the data and I didn't have, a medical personnel like kind of backing me up what I was thinking of what was happening. So I think that that caused a lot of just mental health stuff on like a whole other level of like, why am I, why is this happening to me and why am I so different? Again, this was during a time where we didn't really have social media. So I didn't really have anyone to talk to also, which made things really difficult. Um, so yeah, anyway, I feel like I have gone on for half an hour. So thank you for listening to me on that. Trying to think what else that I've tried, but anti-inflammatory diets. I've had a lot of good luck with like paleo and even carnivore, like for some reason. But I just say again, don't be afraid to try things and maybe just pick like one or two that you want to give it a try and see how it works for you. And the other thing is, not everything is going to be like a win, but like I know the things that work for me and I know the don'ts. And I know that I'll just give you a real quick example before I stop. But I went to an acupuncturist and he said, I'm going to be really honest with you. I'm going to do 6 sessions with you. And if you don't feel any different, then acupuncture is not going to work for you. And I was like, wow, I appreciate you being so honest with me and not just making me come back and, take my money and it's not helping. And it didn't really help me as much as I was hoping it would. But I've gone to salt caves and I've seen incredible, like within an hour of getting out of a salt cave. And that has been a huge part of like a healing modality that I added. So you have to sort of try things and figure out what works for you. Again, track all of that stuff, put it somewhere so that you have the data, that you see how you feel right after, you see how you feel a couple days and a couple weeks later, and you will be able to determine what is actually working.
Thank you so much, Marissa. That was so amazing, and that kind of was a perfect segue to lead into one of our questions was just how long, like we have the acupuncture example, but like how long would you give yourself to kind of assess if something had worked for you or not?
I think it just depends on like what it is that you're doing. I will say for something like functional medicine, we would introduce things slowly and I would try them for like 2 or 3 months. And that whole time I would be taking notes. I've tried a lot of supplements and I would say for, maybe half of them, I couldn't feel anything. And I was like, is this thing even working? And then I would try some supplements, specifically like functional medicine supplements that are typically stronger, more like pharmaceutical grade. For a lot of those, I could feel that difference within a few days or a few weeks. Again, like the salt cave, I remember the first time I tried it within like that first hour because I also have breathing issues. And I just knew, like, I felt so completely different. But that is what that is specifically for, like breathing issues, inflammation. Another great thing if you have inflammation, if you have an actual salt cave near you, um, that might be something to try. But acupuncture, I don't know. I never felt anything. And I was very honest with him, and he was very honest with me. But then something like massage, that works really well for some people, and they feel that immediately. And then for some people, or even like chiropractic, sometimes it has this rebound effect, and they kind of feel worse like a couple of days later. So I think that's where it also comes like, and we can't remember everything. Like there's no way I can't even remember like my acupuncture appointments or what we really did, but I can, because it was years ago, but I can go back and look on all the data that I saved, and that's why like tracking and those journals have been a godsend for me.
Yeah, definitely. I hear that. There's so much happening. It's kind of like, I can't keep track of it all. So it kind of sounds like you would introduce like one new thing at a time and then see how that worked and then move on to something else. And so like you're like spewing off all these amazing things for people to try. Like how did you get from one to the next? Like how did you know what was that next thing to try? Was it like a recommendation from your functional medicine doctor? Were you looking online or is there somewhere that people can go to find this wealth of information?
Yeah, I mean, my functional medicine doctor was definitely helpful. I was a journalist for most of my career, so I like to research, I like to dig. I was kind of just digging around and seeing what other people are doing. Um, just Google like anti-inflammatory like therapies, IV therapy, like that's another thing that I introduced about 10 years ago, like getting different types of vitamin IV therapy, and those have been also amazing for me. And, those are typically done under a doctor or a nurse and going through your medical history and what medications you're taking so that you know what you can and cannot receive. Um, those have been, especially when I am in a flare and I have active symptoms. I also tend to run really low on my blood pressure so that when I used to get my period, it would get even worse. And some of them now like even come to your house. I had one come to my house like a month ago, and it was so great because without that, I would have like no doubt by that night I would have wound up in the emergency room. So I think it's just now we have just obviously TikTok and Instagram and like so many different people that we can follow and look at and kind of see what they're doing. And also like food has been a huge thing for me. The strange thing though is about food, it's like, I come from like a huge Italian family and I love to travel, but my food is so specific now because of what I found, like what causes me extra symptoms and what actually makes me feel really good, that it has made life in a way like easier for me and my symptoms, but more difficult when I want to go out with friends and like go out to dinner, or I want to travel and I have to like really research what is around that I can eat while I'm away. So I'm typically the one with like a huge cooler of food, like anytime I go somewhere. But you create this sort of lifestyle that works for you over time. And the reason like I have all of that now is because I feel like this has been like a 20-year, experiment basically.
Life's great experiment, right? So for someone who is kind of ready to try like the first step, making some of these lifestyle changes, like they're probably not gonna be able to dive in with a cooler, even though that's amazing that you know exactly what can and can't have. But what would you kind of recommend as like the first step to making an impact, hopefully, on on most people for some of those healthier lifestyle shifts?
I think, it really comes down to if you think about like what's the one first area that maybe excites you the most? Like maybe you're just not a real big food person. I am. My memoir, half of it's cookbook because I grew up cooking at like 7 in the morning with my grandma. So I really wanted to find out about like how food was affecting me because I would notice in my journal, like I would eat certain things and I would either get like more swollen or I would have like an immediate like stomach reaction and stuff like that. If you go that route because that excites you, I always tell people if you are able to go see an allergist. People with autoimmune tend to have very high percentage of allergic responses, whether that's to the environment, to food. So, you might see these things online that are like, this is really healthy for you. And, like, okay, I'll give you an example. I love avocados. I used to eat like 1 to 2 a day, just eat it with like a spoon and some lemon juice. It came up the highest on my allergy test. And I wasn't having like anaphylaxis to it, but my allergist was like, you're having horrific stomach aches. And I actually think it's the avocado because it came up so high. And so I took them out of my diet as much as that just made me like cry. And I don't get those stomach reactions anymore. So I think seeing an allergist and actually finding what is the best food for you to eat or what you might need to kind of back away from for a little while and then reintroduce it, that would be my suggestion if food interests you. But functional medicine might interest you. The only thing about functional medicine is, it can be a costly endeavor. So it might be, something to save up money for, maybe a little bit further down the road. Um, Maybe you do want to try like acupuncture. Maybe that's because sometimes insurance does cover that, or like chiropractic and things like that. Or it might just be something like an infrared heating pad. Maybe you want to try that for your swelling and joint pain if you get more joint pain. I think it just depends on what part actually interests you that's kind of where you want to start off with. I don't want to tell you to go start off with like food and dietary stuff if like you hate that part of just some people just aren't foodies, right? It's just the way it is. Um, the other thing I would say is that I don't think I mentioned it is like you have to have because we go through so much, especially like internally and the things that we think about with chronic illness, because it affects every single area of our life, you have to have a place where you're getting those feelings or that emotion out to someone who is safe. And that might be like talk therapy. It might be, therapy online. It might be music therapy or art therapy. Like you mentioned, like I love art. Art is where I go and kind of get that out because um, I'm not such an emotional person, but it comes out in like my art. And I love talk therapy. I'm a big proponent of talk therapy. But if I always tell people like if you haven't expressed your emotions or grieved in just the chronic illness itself, that will 100% also come out as more severe symptoms if that is just something that you're holding on to. So maybe that's an area that you try first.
That's such a good reminder. I'm just like the mind body connection to the physical and the mental health are so intertwined.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we talked a lot about tips to reduce inflammation during or before your period. You had a lot of good nuggets in there. What about any myths? Are there any myths that we should debunk?
Hmm. I mean, I think I don't know if it could be a myth, but more like just gaslighting of just like oh, like that's just, that's just normal period, and I feel like I heard that a lot. Like every girl gets that, every woman gets that. And it's like, are you sure? Because like my girlfriends are out like living their life, right? And I'm here like ready to go to the hospital. So I think there's that just being dismissed, or that kind of like just buck up, and like every other women have been going through this for centuries and generations, right? So maybe not so much a myth, but more of just being dismissed. And I think a lot of us have probably experienced that. So if no one has told you, there is absolutely a connection between hormones and your period and your symptoms, and you're not crazy and you're not imagining this, and this happens to some of us, like, then let me be the one to tell you so that you can have that permission that you might need to then go and say, hey, this is happening. And whether it's to your doctor or whoever it is, but like, I want to talk about this and I want to see if there's a way to find help.
Yeah, that's such a good reminder to remember that you know your body the best, right? Like you're the one who experiences it, you're the one who feels it. And so this we you touched on this earlier about like bring the data, like tell them like this is what I'm feeling, like this is my, like the past 3 months of data that I have and showing your doctors that if they're still giving someone the like, oh, well, this just happens. This is part of having a period. Do you have any tips for people to push back? Like maybe it's like a little phrase that you use or like a script that they can kind of defer to if they need to push back with their care team?
I mean, I'm pretty vocal, and I think it just also depends on what you're comfortable with saying. Some people have told me, that they bring someone with them, maybe a family member that's a little bit more vocal. I come from a very loud, vocal Italian family, right? So it's like if you feel something, you just kind of say it. But, I've told doctors, like, I really feel like you're not listening to me. I really need you to hear me. Like I've been waiting for this appointment and I really need you to actually hear what I'm saying, but I feel like you're not listening to me. Like I'm trying to show you, like I'm not just making this up at the top of my head. Like I have actual like notes here and this is affecting my life. I think it's like I know you only see me for this like 15-minute and this is what you're seeing, but this is actually affecting my every single like day life. And or I have told them like I feel like you're not taking me seriously, and I feel like I need a second opinion at this point. I think it kind of just stops them. And also, I try to be gracious in the sense of maybe they're having a really hard day and it might just like seem like they're not paying as much attention as they should be. They might have just gotten out of another room with someone and given them like really horrible news and they're trying to like just adjust, right? So I think just having like that open communication, like I want us to have open communication here. Um, and just like advocate for yourself. If something doesn't feel right, like tell them. If you're not comfortable with something, tell them. If you're not comfortable trying a medication or you feel like you haven't gotten enough information about it, speak up. Like it's your body. You have to put that in your body. You have to live with it every single day. Um, I know that, advocating again can sometimes feel uncomfortable. Um, Again, like not even just the data, because I do think that, they are so data driven and it helps them kind of come up with like this, okay, this is the puzzle pieces that this person is bringing me and I need to come up with a solution. But if you are feeling really ill or you're having brain fog or just extreme exhaustion that day, and there have been times that I've done this, write it out on a piece of paper and just say, these are the things that I want to talk to you about. I don't necessarily like even have all of the energy today, but these are my worst 5 symptoms in the last like week or the last month that I really need addressed while I'm here. And last, again, if you have to bring someone that's maybe a little bit more vocal than you are, that's okay too.
Those are all such great tips. And also a good reminder that doctors are humans too, and we don't know what they just experienced before meeting with us. Something that I tend to forget. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about foods, what not to eat, like the greasy foods, the fried foods. Like I loved that idea of staying on the outside of the grocery store. I've never even thought about it, but it totally is set up that way. Are there any other foods that you've helped or that you found like you really need to avoid right before your period or on your period, or that you like add in?
Okay, so sugar is so horrendous for me. And like, I mean, we don't really have too much of it in the house anymore because I notice like within an hour, I start to feel worse from eating sugar. Um, and it's not even just like straight like adding like white sugar to say your coffee or whatever, or processed food. It's even looking at like I just call it like crappy carbs that essentially just turn into sugar. So and let me tell you, I love chocolate. Chocolate is my downfall of all food, okay? Like I will be so good for like a month and then I will just go all in on like a bunch of chocolate and man, do I pay for the next like day or two because now I have cut so much sugar out of my diet that the minute it gets reintroduced in something, the inflammation and the horrific body pain that comes from it, it's like that in my body. And it was only as I was able to sort of push things out for a while and journal, because then I would like reintroduce it back in and kind of see what reaction I was having. Fried food isn't like an absolute no. I can't like even remember the last time that I had something because it's like immediate stomach reaction, right? But if you're eating all of this stuff on a regular basis, then it's really hard to pinpoint what is actually causing the problem. Um, but sugar creeps in so many different areas, right? From just like a lot of the things that people drink to even like ketchup, it's like full of sugar and something that you wouldn't even think of, right? That could just be bringing so much extra sugar. Um, Even like a soda. Like I remember when I was younger and I was just diagnosed, or getting in that process of being diagnosed with lupus. I was in nursing school and I need to stay awake. And I would down Mountain Dews from the vending machine while I was in nursing school, right? I always had horrific body pain. I had no idea what was going on in my body. And then when I realized, and I'm not trying to just like call out that soda, but there's like what, like 14 teaspoons of sugar in a can, and I'm just like, chugging them because I need to stay awake. And then I was working at night after I would be in, nursing program all day. God, the amount of sugar that I was having. So, and it might be different, for someone else, it might be dairy or it might be the fried food and like those just, oils. Again, then that's another place that an allergist, I think, with food can really help you because like I did a lot of elimination diets. I also did at several times, like in years past, like leaky gut diets with my functional medicine doctor to sort of reset my gut. And leaky gut diet is very, like, you're eliminating so much. But it's helpful because as soon as you start eating things again, like I notice almost immediately when I'm having an issue with something.
Gotcha. Yeah. And for anyone who's not familiar with leaky gut, do you mind just giving us just like a brief this is not a medical definition, but just like a brief overview of what it is?
Oh gosh, yeah. I'll try. So basically, it's just that your gut is so inflamed that it is allowing things to get through it that normally shouldn't get through it. And as it permeates, right, it is causing like this constant inflammatory response. And that could be, swelling, diarrhea, constipation, constant stomach aches, abdominal cramping, food sensitivities. You might be like having hives and a lot of reaction to food sensitivities because it shouldn't be able to permeate, but your gut is so damaged, the lining is so damaged that it's letting things through it that it shouldn't be. And so you kind of have to go through this healing process of very specific like healing foods and like I would be making, crock pots of like bone broths and things that were just very healing to the gut. My dog would like lose his mind, right? Because he'd be smelling meat throughout the whole house. Um, but a couple of months and like I saw a huge change in just my gut health. And that was also alongside of things like L-glutamine, which is a big supplement, and that was something that my functional medicine doctor put me on. That is to also heal your stomach lining, and like licorice root, probiotics. And that's the other thing. It's like I would dig so much because I'm gonna go to a place here that like we don't talk about a lot, but in the United States, like they don't really look at your stool like the way they do in other countries, right? Like they might give you a stool test to see if you have like C. diff or colon cancer, things like that. But there are like outside labs that you can go online and order a a full report of what is happening in your gut. And those are also really great to determine like, is there celiac? Is there leaky gut? A lot of those reports will kind of give you this whole thing at the end of what it's seeing. And they're looking at like E. coli, right? And C. diff and all of these different things that belong in your gut, but what levels are they at? But here's the thing, like once you get that report back, and I've done this a few times now, and I'm able to look at that with my functional medicine doctor. Depending on what's low or what's out of range or something might be really high, throwing like just random probiotics at things, you might actually be making things worse. So there are certain probiotic strains that will help if something is way off, that can help bring it back to the middle. Now, a lot of these reports today, I mean, I'm going back like 5, 6, 7 years ago, they didn't do this, but I'm noticing that more of them today actually are telling you these are the strains that might make it worse, and these are the strains you might want to add into your diet. So, when I was adding in probiotics, it was very specific things to help kind of bring those back in range. And then I'd have the test again 6 months later, and I would see that a lot of that stuff had healed or at least gotten better.
That's amazing. What do you mind sharing, or if you know off the top of your head, the name of the lab that you used for that test?
Yeah, so years ago I used, I think it was Veritas, but there's so many out there now. Like there was only like one or two back then, right? And I feel like now it's becoming more and more popular. So, yeah, I would say just look for one. A lot of them will give you a sample on their website of what their report looks like, and go through those samples because some of them are really in depth, and they go, and also I think depends on how much you're paying for the test. Some of them add specific things for leaky gut, and they're looking at like your histamine levels. So see what they're actually checking for and look at their sample reports and what is, some of them also give you recommendations that you can then go and talk to your doctor about.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then just speaking of, like, if someone was looking for a functional medicine doctor, like, what did you look for when you found yours? Like, did they specialize in autoimmune? Was it hormone health? Like, what were some of the things that made you want to work with this person?
Yeah, so I was actually able to get two recommendations because I had one that was down in Florida and one that was down up in New York. But I think, looking at people online and doing some research, like you said, some really do focus like specifically women's health, hormonal, issues, and doing different types of hormonal tests that you don't normally get, like even your gynecology office. These are typically a lot different that they have access to, or at least that they'll do. Um, so I wanted people that specifically had, awareness of lupus and some other issues that I, have like allergies and asthma, right? So my body's just haywire because it overreacts basically to everything. And I wanted someone that really had some knowledge about that. But and honestly, like reviews, like I feel like reviews are really helpful. A lot of functional medicine doctors, when you put their name in on search engines, you will have some reviews from patients, and some of them could be really telling. And a lot of times they'll say, like, I went to so and so for this, and that also should help you with, like, okay, is this someone that's right for me? And they
Awesome.
don't necessarily have to be also, I want to say, like in your town. Like I saw my functional medicine doctor in Florida, and then we would do everything else over Zoom, and he would order tests for me to my house, and we would then, do it on Zoom after that. So that's also really nice because some people, like where I live now, is a very small town. of 5,000 people coming from being raised in New York City, right? So my access to things is very different, but thank God I live in a time now where I can order just so many tests online, like even like food sensitivity tests. Like I think Everwell has one. There's a lot of companies. And the other thing is, you know, and I talk about this on Lupus Check, but there are, if you don't have like a primary physician or you don't have insurance, there are so many labs now, it blows my mind, online that you can go in and they have every test available to you. And they basically give you from a doctor a slip, and you can go and bring that into any lab. So you don't, if there's things that you just want to test on your own, like if I just want to test like my lupus numbers, but I don't want to have to deal with waiting 6 months to get into a rheumatologist, I can order them at these labs online, get the rec sheet printed out, and take them to a lab. Like I know in Greenville, which is one of the closest cities to me, in Asheville and Atlanta, there's a company called like any lab test now or something, and you just walk in with like your these labs and you can have them done. So that's another way that you can sort of take control and start looking at stuff too.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that reminder. I think I'm in California, so like LabCorp and Quest are really big out here, where I
Yeah.
think you can I don't know how many of the tests you can order, but I know I've seen that. I was
Well,
re
so a lot of those online testing companies, when you get the letter, those are two of the big ones that you can bring that to.
That's amazing. Yeah, so then
Yeah.
people can that's such a good, I mean, that is so helpful for so many people who, like you said, they're waiting for forever to get into their doctor they're curious about these numbers and their doctor won't order them, that you do, like you can do that yourself as well. We did get a question from someone who's listening today. So it says there's a lot of evidence that sugar is inflammatory, but why fried foods? Is it related to acid reflux? And did you have any digestive issues that correlated to your other inflammatory symptoms?
Yeah, I think with fried foods, it's just when things are fried, that the response in your body is an inflammatory response. So there's a lot of books, like if you go and do sort of a deep dive on anti-inflammatory diets, what you'll learn in that is every food, once you eat it and it goes into your digestive system and it starts breaking down, it will either cause an inflammatory effect or an anti-inflammatory effect. This is for every single thing that you put in your body. It's just chemistry. And if you do a deep dive into anti-inflammatory diets, sorry, they usually have charts of what's inflammatory and what's not. So when things are fried at like high temperatures, it tends to then cause an inflammatory response in the body. Again, my husband, who's like the healthiest human on the planet, can live on beef jerky, Taco Bell, and popcorn. Like we joke, we laugh at him all the time in our family. It's like a running joke. I mean, beef jerky is like one of the most like inflammatory, histamine producing foods. And popcorn, I don't even think it has any nutritional, factor to it that could help you. He's the healthiest person because his body is clearing the inflammatory proteins and, cytokines and everything that go off in your body when you consume this food. But for people like us, like red meat is naturally inflammatory. It just is in a chemistry sense. But when a healthy person eats it, their body can handle that overload where we're already dealing with an overload. So, how much more are we adding onto that by just the things that we're eating every single day?
I see. I didn't know that about the red meat. I know like they always say like stay away from it for I think many different reasons, but that's yeah, it's interesting to think about like you put something in your body, it's either going to be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. It's like I feel like that's like a good visual for me
Yeah.
as like a very visual person.
And like I still eat red meat. I just don't eat it a lot. But like I just really try, and I definitely like whatever you want to use the name, but like I kind of fall off the wagon again with like I love dessert and I love chocolate. And so that's kind of like, and I'm not going to deny myself that either, but I know that I'm probably not going to feel so great the next day depending on how much I eat. Or, if I have some lemonade or something that's high, high sugar. like I do have fruit though. That's the thing. Like fruit is sugar. It's a natural sugar, but I try to limit it, but if I want something sweet, I will go usually towards like grapes or an orange and get that whatever that my body needs right now. It wants something sweet. And then make sure that the rest of my day I'm eating like foods that are not going to just cause that reaction. And also for me, like I know it's the strangest thing, but it comes on like within minutes of now because I have cut out so many sugars that even if I had like I had a bagel the other day because I was in a rush and it was the only thing available to me while I was driving. Um, and it is basically just like white processed flour and probably shot my sugar up and just turns to sugar, my heart pounded for like 3 hours after. And I'm sure it's because my sugar probably went crazy in my body because I just don't eat stuff like that anymore. And years ago, if I had eaten a bagel and the same thing happened, like I probably didn't even process it in my mind thinking that it could have been the bagel, right? Because I think of a bagel as kind of a benign thing to eat. But once you really start tracking your foods and changing up your diet, you notice things like pretty quickly in your body when they haven't been in there in a while.
Yeah, it's a good reminder on the mindfulness of consuming or just like what you're doing, like actually paying attention to the signs that your body's giving you, the
Yeah.
signs and signals. We're, believe it or not, already getting right at close to time. So we have just one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. But this is someone that submitted from before. It says, it always feels like my system flares around and during periods. I would love some suggestions for coping.
I think it comes down to one, really, and I'm not saying that this is something that comes easily and I still struggle with it, but knowing that that is happening to your body and really giving like your body that grace of like, okay, I I had this conversation with someone the other day, and I'm sorry, I'm going to draw this out into like a couple of different areas. But when we're diagnosed with autoimmune or like these chronic illnesses, like it's presented to us in a way of your body is working against you, your body's attacking you, you're at war, right? So it's like if you're at war with something, you're not friendly with them, right? So you see it as like this thing that's always going against you. And through therapy and all these other things that I've tried, now I kind of see it as like my body is like fighting so hard for me every single day because it's not working properly, but yet our body is designed to keep us alive and always try to come into some kind of balance, and ours are working like even harder. So I think just giving yourself that grace of like my body really struggles on these couple of days, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help it. Um, and like find something that you love doing, like whether it's, again, like maybe it's going on to something like BetterHelp and having someone to talk to, or a support group, or maybe that's just a time that you need to put earbuds in and get extra rest and listen to music that's like really calming. Like I have this app that like plays different frequencies, and it's beautiful music. Like if different things are bothering you in your body and it puts me at peace, I usually like fall asleep. Um, but find something that brings you just calm and peace. And if there are little ways that you can start to help yourself every month, like whether it's preparing meals in advance so that you don't have to expend extra energy, um, or having things delivered that help you, you know, maybe, if it's a monetary issue, maybe just on those couple of days, like you treat yourself to some juices and things that are like really anti-inflammatory and will make you feel better, give you a little bit more energy. Um, and then I think just finding like that support, that safe person or that safe group of like, I'm really struggling on these couple of days, but it's almost like we have to give ourselves permission at times of like, yeah, this is really hard. Like I feel horrible right now. And I'm still trying to like work and live and maybe take care of my kids. I take care of my mom full time. Like it's a lot and it can be really challenging. And I think just like don't add to it. And I'm still learning this lesson of like don't add to it by being even harder on yourself. Like your body is doing the best that it can. So what are the things that we can add to help it? And that's going to be different for everyone. That's why I say it's going to be a process of learning what works for you.
That was a really good one to end on. I love that whole notion of just really celebrating your body. Oh my gosh, I just saw one more.
Oh, go ahead.
Aren't you nice? Oh, someone, if we have a few minutes, just said thank you for being here today, and I learned a lot from you. I appreciate you
Oh.
for taking the time to educate me. Happy New Year. My question that I have is, out of the books you have in your office, which one is your favorite? I already jotted down the three that are visible.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Obviously, being a writer, I love books. That's my memoir, Chronically Fabulous. I don't know. I kind of like it, but I think it depends. Okay. Medical medium, we hear a lot about him, but I do like some of his protocols. Um, if you're faith-based, this is a good friend of mine, Britt, who we are starting our podcast in 2 weeks. Her book is called God Doesn't Suck, but Your Chronic Illness Does. And I think that, if you're struggling like with faith, it's a great book because I think in our humanity, like we ask, why is this happening to me? Why did this happen to me? It has changed my entire life. You're watching all of your friends and family kind of go about their life, and you have an illness that is changing every area of your life. So this might be a topic that, is something incredible for you to maybe look at. And I also like fiction, so I don't know. I mean, there's so many things here. So yeah, there's a lot. This is another friend of mine. I actually helped her get this book published, and again, faith-based, but it's all about therapy and why is therapy still have such a stigma, especially for people that have mental health issues or have been abused or gone through trauma and have chronic illness. You know, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but it's something that really like blew my mind. I asked the question years ago on Lupus Chick. I said, do you know what your initial trigger was that brought out your symptoms? Because I know, looking back, I know what mine are, right? I got run over by a drunk driver when I was crossing a street, and I spent a year in the hospital in recovery, and that's when all the lupus symptoms came out at once, and I got this lupus diagnosis. But everyone started bringing in like their answers in this poll that I had, and pregnancy was a big one. An illness, like maybe they got pneumonia or just a really bad illness, even COVID. We see a lot of people getting diagnosed with autoimmune disease after COVID. But a really big one was sexual assault. And I was shocked by that answer. But it does something to your immune system, right? And it does something to you emotionally and psychologically. And of course, your immune system and your body's going to have a reaction to something like that, right? And that's why I tell people, like, thank God our generation is more open to therapy because it has been like one of the best tools. So I think that that's a really timely book as well. So yeah, that's what I got. And on the bottom is like 50 cookbooks. So can't see all of those. I
I love a good bookshelf.
love
Well,
books.
thank you so much, Marissa, for your wealth of knowledge and sharing your story with us today. It was so many good reminders in there, so much good information. We really appreciate your time, and thank you for everyone who joined us today and who sent in your questions. So soon we're going to be launching kind of these more like community homes or knowledge hubs, if you will. On them, you'll find some of the content that Marissa has also written. So you can find that on our website as well. We'll make sure to send some of that in our follow-up. Um, we'll also be able to include other workshops and webinars and things that we'll be doing. So like we have one coming up in the first week of March that will be all about diet and autoimmune disease and just, we'll have a nutritionist with us. So lots coming up and we'll keep you posted on all of that. And then of course we will be sending out the recording later this week with some different resources and things to help you. So again, Marissa, thank you so much for joining us today. That was so wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I had a great time.
Awesome. Have a good day, everyone.